Well, 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 look who's back again. It's Anbernic, who have not been nearly as prolific this year as they were last year, with almost a dozen devices. But they haven't been quiet. No, sir. They've rolled out some new chips, some interesting new designs, and then this, the RG476H. This is kind of an oddball coming from Anbernic. It's not running their top-of-the-line chip, it's not innovative in its form factor or design, and in fact, it's kind of derivative of devices from other companies, like the Retroid Pocket 5 here with the all-glass front. With all of that being said, why am I intrigued by this thing? Well, sir, I think it's because the RG476H is in kind of a weird niche. It's more powerful than the Magmi Air everyone's going nuts for, but it's also a little more expensive. It's not as powerful as the Retroid Pocket 5, but it's cheaper. It's in its own little price bracket, and while it might not be the best bang for your buck, it might be the best premium feeling device you can get for this cheap. Anyway, stay tuned as I do my normal deep dive review, and sorry about my voice. It's that magical time of year where everyone is as sick as a dog, including me, your old buddy Zoo. First off, let's get some comparisons out of the way, because I have the 477M right here in my hand, and I've really warmed up on the 477M. I got a grip from my pals at JC Studios down the road from me, and so my ergonomic issues have been solved, and I'm going to be doing a 477M after action video on this pretty soon. They both have that same beautiful screen, same basic D-pad, same buttons, same sticks, same start, select, menu, everything, but this one's plastic, it has big old triggers, this one's metal, and it has inline triggers. It also has those nice little pads on the bottom. Oh, and fun fact, the fan on this one isn't absurdly loud. So good job, Anbernic. You fixed the fan that you broke on your previous device. So let's talk about price. This guy went for $150 plus shipping for the first few days, but then I got real sick. If you think I'm talking weird now, boy, you should have heard me the other day. Anyway, now it's $165 plus shipping. So let's say you need to drop 10 bucks for shipping, and we'll call this a $175 device. Now, these go on sale all the time, so you might end up seeing this a lot cheaper before too long. Maybe $150, maybe $140, maybe $135. I don't know. Anbernic runs sales all the time. And like I said in the intro, this is in a weird middle niche between budget Android devices like the Magmi Air X and something like the Retroid Pocket 5 or Retroid Pocket Flip. Now, if you're a lunatic like me, and you already have a bunch of these things, you probably already have something they can emulate better than this. That being said, you probably also paid more than $175 for it, but you're set. However, if you're someone who got into the hobby with one of them TikTok sales on an R36 or one of the many, many derivatives, and you're looking for something that can get you well into PlayStation 2 and GameCube range for under 200 bucks, then this should be it. I think Anbernic kind of priced this as a 6th gen entry-level device, and it's actually a little bit clever on their part. It just occurred to me we didn't do a device tour outside of the comparisons. You have your shoulder buttons and your triggers on the top, you have your power on the top, your volume on the top, your fan intake, your fan outtake on the back, nothing else on the back, very, very flat. Note the lack of butt doots, we'll get there. Nothing on the sides, and on the bottom, you have your 2 downward firing speakers, USB-C, your SD slot. Mine is actually flush. I know Russell Decor, my sometimes friend, Russell Decor, his poked out. Mine's fine. And headphone jack on the bottom. I like that. On the front here, you have all your buttons and your beautiful screen. The D-pad is a classic Anbernic D-pad. It's got an almost perfect combination of feel and pivot. It's like a very, very refined Super Nintendo D-pad, and that's really, really great. Anbernic has basically mastered the D-pad on these things. They make these D-pads that are somehow perfectly right in the middle of hyper-precise, so you're not throwing a ton of false diagonals unless you really wiggle the button here. But you can also hit those diagonals when you want in fighting games. I do have some issues because the start and select are bundled on the lower right side, and I wish they were separated. Like, start over here, select over here, but whatever. The face buttons are also really good. They're a good size in comparison to the overall device. They're not too proud, right? They don't jut out too much. And they have a nice, light click to them. No complaints. I do have some complaints about these shoulders, though. Anbernic went with a really sleek design with these nicely flared triggers, and I like these. They're really nice. The issue with the shoulder buttons, though, is the noise. Listen to this. Ugh. That's gross. They sound like a mouse from the early 1990s. In addition to systems that actually use LNR, I also use LNR as hotkeys for RetroArch. So basically, I use them a lot, and they're loud, and I twitch just a little bit every time I use them. This device marks the debut of the all-glass front for Anbernic. I gotta be honest with you guys, I really don't like the all-glass fronts. I don't understand the appeal of adding extra breakable surface area instead of just sticking to the screen. The glass on this doesn't go all the way to the edge. There's like a little lip, but it doesn't really bother me. I've never like run my finger over it and said, it's just, there's a little gap. And there's also gaps in the glass around the D-pad and the buttons. Now that's good because it makes the overall feel of the controls a lot better. The sticks on here are a little small, but they honestly fit the design of the device. They're Hall sticks. They have a ton of range because the indentation is big enough and there's no cardinal snapping. The caps also come off, so you can put on replacement ones if you don't like the Anbernic style. Like maybe you want to put some cool hype sticks on. Look at that. Ooh, different. It's a lot higher. Actually feels a lot better. You ruin the profile, but it feels a lot better to play. Now there's something weird about this device because individually, all these components are great, but as a whole, overall, I don't actually really like the ergo of this because it needs butt cheeks. It really, really needs butt cheeks. Something to wrap your fingers around while you're holding it because it's thin. But it's also dense. It's heavy for its size. And so I really think you need those DualShock style handles or something. I would assume they made this to be more pocketable, but it really, really needs a grip. Otherwise, it's uncomfortable. It's not so much a fatigue issue. It's more of a, I can't find a really good grip for it. This is especially apparent when you're playing games that require sticks and the shoulders and the triggers. I would assume they made this to be more pocketable, but it really, really needs a grip. Otherwise, it's just uncomfortable. It's not so much of a fatigue issue. It's more of a, I can't find a great hand grip for it issue. This is especially apparent when you're playing something like Madden here on the GameCube, because you're trying to use the L and the R and the Z buttons as you try to sack Steve McNair. RIP. Although I guess they took Steve out of the game. Still RIP. That's a terrible story what happened to him. You should look it up on Google after you watch the video. Ooh. Going back to the menu buttons on this guy, you have your Android back/home button. A tap is your Android back input, which is good for emulators that use the back button to open menus. And a longer press is the home button, which I don't use a lot, but it helps if something crashes and you need to go back to Android. The R button here is the Anbernic front end, but I don't really use that on these Android devices at all. I think Anbernic knows that might be the norm, so they have a way to map it to whatever front end you want. I have mine mapped to ESDE, which is pretty cool. It makes this a little closer to the unified nature of a Linux device. Ooh. One last point about the buttons. The layout here is really, really well suited for D-pad games, and since you've got this amazing 4x3 screen, you're probably going to want to do tons of SNES, Genesis, PlayStation 1, and other actually retro games that will be D-pad centric. If you do want to play a lot of stick games, screen's not going to be great for modern stuff, and the orientation, the weird grip, the lack of butt doots, you're probably not going to have a great time. Let's talk about the screen. This is the same 4x3-inch screen that was in the RG Slide and the 477M. It's a beautiful 4.7-inch LTPS screen that doesn't suffer from any PWM flickering like we've seen in the past. It's 1280 by 960 with a refresh rate of 120 Hz. Woo! The 120 Hz panel allows you to do some pretty slick black frame insertion or some cool shader effects. My sometimes pal Russell Decor has a video on it, which I'll link in the description, but basically, you're running the game at 120 FPS, so you can include a black frame half the time. The end result is a 60 FPS game with an almost subliminal flickering effect that mimics the original CRT screens. It's pretty cool, and it looks a lot better in person than on camera, which is why I'm not really going to try to show it off too much. Oh yeah, the battery. I have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery on here, and that'll get you 3 to 4 hours of super high-end stuff. and closer to 8 or more if you're playing lower end games, like Super Nintendo here or PlayStation 1 or really anything up to and including N64, Dreamcast, and Saturn. I've been playing a bunch on this for about a week now, and this guy is really power efficient. Now, we've done a ton of videos on this chipset, so you can go back to some earlier reviews if you want some detailed gameplay footage. But basically, everything below GameCube and PS2 will play upscaled to 720p or with a bunch of shaders on, if that's your jam. You can really stack up CRT shaders for your 32-bit and below games because of the relative power of this T820 chip. But yeah, pretty much everything under GameCube and PlayStation 2 will run really well. So you can go crazy putting shaders on all your 8-bit and your 16-bit content, and then even a hard-to-run game like Cruising USA is running at 960p. Pretty cool. For GameCube here, you can play a huge chunk of the library at 2x resolution, which is awesome. And then since the GameCube was basically designed for those 4x3 screens we used to have back in the early 2000s, you can really maximize your GameCube experience here with your 4.7-inch screen. That's a lot of real estate, especially if you can run some games at 720p. There's a fair amount of games you might need to scale back down to native resolution to get to 100% speed, but that's still a pretty good authentic experience. You'll still run into some trouble with games like Rogue Squadron, but that's honestly a pain in the ass to run on most chips. Wii games go along the same lines as GameCube, except I think there's a higher proportion they're going to have to be run at 1x resolution instead of 2x. And then there'll also be a handful that either won't work or require so many motion controls that it's kind of pointless. Now for PS2, your options are more limited. I'd say you can play maybe 75% of the library at least 1x. You'll have a handful of games that'll run at 1.5, which is fine for this screen, and maybe some that'll go all the way to 2x, like Vice City here. Whee! But then again, you're going to run into games that'll chug a little bit even at 1x. So like Dragon Quest here will run fine at 1x in the intro, but as soon as you get to the first town, the slowdown starts to become apparent. It starts to become Chug City, USA. Ugh. You can fix it with some underclocking, but this isn't as plug and play as the 577, which makes sense because it's also not as powerful. It's also not as expensive, so I guess it's kind of a trade-off. For 3DS, you can play a lot of games at 3x resolution or at 2x resolution here like with Fire Emblem Awakenings, and you can set it to use almost the whole screen if the second screen is just something superfluous, like a map. And then if you do need to swap screens, R3 by default swaps them for you so you can switch back pretty easily. Whee! This does not work with the Retroid dual screen setup, but Anbernic has been teasing their own second screen for a while, and once that comes out, you should have a pretty decent DS and 3DS machine here, especially if it's configured to sit appropriately on top like they keep showing in those promo videos. Well, Gary, the clock on the wall says it's time for What Did We Learn? And we learned that the RG476H is a budget plus device with an amazing 4.7-inch 4x3 screen and an older but solid chip in the T820 here. That older chip means it's cheaper than the very similar 477M, but it's also a lot less powerful. If you're someone just getting into the hobby or someone upgrading from the wild world of RK3326 devices, then I think the 476H here is really solid. Or if you love the idea of the 477M here with that amazing 4.7-inch screen, but it's just too heavy, then maybe you're going to want to pivot to the 476H. But if you already have something as powerful or even more powerful, then I wouldn't get it. This to me is something for a brand new user, someone that's upgrading. It's not something that you have to have, right? It's just kind of iterative. And that's okay. That's fine. Anbernic's allowed to be iterative occasionally. Now the ergonomics on this, for me at least, are kind of a weak point, and using it for dual stick gaming is frustrating to say the least. I know a lot of people who love these slim handhelds because they're more pocketable, and there are some reviewers who already got one of these and said they like the ergo. Maybe I just have hands that need some thick doots to wrap around. Well, maybe that's also the Dayquil talking. If you made it this far, be sure to like and subscribe and all that jazz. And heck, let's do a goofy comment idea. Leave a comment with who you think I sound like when I have a cold. This time I was doing a lot of Macho Man. Ooh, yeah. Until my wife told me to stop. But other times, I sound like Sam Elliott. What do you think? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.